Welcome. It's art. It's music. It's life. It's fashion. It's listening. It's learning. It's sharing. It's determining and discerning fact from fiction, from illusion, from fantasy. It's art inspired by life. It's life inspired by art. We're living at a time like no other on planet Earth. Spiritual, physical, metaphysical, insights, wisdom, challenges. We're more connected by technology and less connected to each other. We're all seeking answers, and we're often too busy to listen for the truth. Her story and his story and our story. I research, I question, I look for answers to share with you, exploring higher visions. Authors and publishers and creatives, all bringing us their empowerment tools, their insights. And I'm mining for those gems of wisdom. We share the fiery energy of transformation, healing, inspiration, and lots of revelations. Let's chat. Let's explore. Well, good evening. I think this is a great time to chat. It's a warm August evening. Stars are out. Energy is so vibrant in this quiet evening air. I don't know about you, but I find that the evenings are the most, my creativity, my inspirations really flow in the evening. And tonight is one of those nights. I wanted to share with you some thoughts I've been having, some interesting insights, and really just go a little bit deeper than maybe I have in some previous podcasts. I really want to express to you my gratitude for you joining me on this journey. We are living at such an exciting time, 2022. As part of the evolution of humanity, it seems like this is a monumental time. If you follow astrology or energy work, or just even if you follow politics, social media, you will be aware of this heightened energy and more conflict, while at the same time more desire for change, positive change. And it's as if we're witnessing this drastic divide. There's a lot of talk about, oh, this person's dividing us, or that person or that ideology is dividing us. Religion, politics, the environment, all these different ways of thinking or issues. Just depends on how you want to look at it. And we are, in a sense, being divided, but not the way that it's being promoted. We're growing as a species. Humanity is evolving, and we don't all evolve at the same time, unfortunately. We have free will on this planet, so it is going to be a little chaotic, much like the birthing process, you know? You think about the birthing process, giving birth to a child, or if you have an animal and you've seen it give birth, it's messy. It's sometimes painful. It can be frightening at times. A lot of push and pull, contractions, movement. You move a little bit forward, and then sometimes there's a pause. Then you move a little forward again, and another pause. So I think that's where we're at. And depending on when you were born, when you came to the planet, you'll be much more aware of the vast difference in the world at this time compared to 30 or 40 years ago. When I think about from that period between 1900 and 2000, people that lived, into their 80s, 90s, 100s. My grandmother was 102 when she passed. And what she would have seen in that period of time, the progress, the changes in society, in what was acceptable for polite conversation, as they called it, human rights, things that, who could vote, who couldn't, women's rights in particular, people of color, all of those things changed in that 100 years drastically. And yet, a lot of beliefs didn't change with it. There were still people that kept on saying we were better off in the past. And, that's a relative point of view, because certain people who had power, who had rights, who had prestige, who had access to more wealth, more opportunities, it may have been better for them in the past to have the majority of people in positions of submission, slavery, unfair wages, their voices not being heard. All of those things that people had to work very hard to overcome the beliefs that kept us oppressed. And a lot of it, when women were fighting for women's rights, other women were trying to prevent the majority of women from having rights. Because for some women, not having those rights also meant not having the responsibility. If it was, they could blame their husbands, blame their fathers for their situation in life or whatever was going on. So they didn't have to be responsible for decisions that were being made that might have impacted the environment, impacted education, healthcare, all those kinds of things, even things that directly affected them. But they didn't want to, and that's where the saying came from, don't worry your pretty little head, and some women embraced it. And there's no judgment here. It was a different time. And now it's 2022. We have so much available to us information-wise, so much freedom to learn, truly learn, explore, and question everything. For many of us, the education system we grew up with wasn't really about teaching us to learn. It was teaching us to regurgitate what people before us knew and the status quo. There's this saying that when we're born, we weren't born and given a manual. And I would challenge that. It may not have been a written manual, but it was a manual in the sense that we were taught the rules of life by the people around us, by our environment. We were taught. The first 7 years of life, give or take a year or two, we're like a sponge. So that really is the preparatory time. That is where we establish our ideas about everything. And we learn by other people's words. You could say sometimes we do get a written manual in the form of a religious text. That is not to say that that is the manual that Spirit wanted us to live. And I believe we are spirit. That's where we come from. That's where we'll go back to. And we take on a human body to explore the planet, help to grow the species, help to evolve, to learn to expand what's possible for humans on planet Earth, in harmony with planet Earth. But the manual that we get is really complicated, and it really has to do with our point of view. Because you can even have children growing up in the very same household and have received virtually the same manual, I'm air quotes here, and yet have different points of view. So it really has to do with many factors, our point of view and the filter that we have. You know, if you take a glass of water and pour it through a filter of some sort, depending on how big or small those holes are in the filter, it's going to determine how pure the water is that comes out the other side. Or in some cases, if the filter's dirty, what you're going to get on the other side is not a clean glass of water, not pure water. You're going to pick up some of the debris from the filter. So the filter is how we see the world. It's like putting on glasses that are smudged. You're going to see the world with smudges. Our point of view comes from our internal voice, our intuition, our ego, our own DNA, our own makeup that we came into the world with. And if you believe in past lives, that could play a role too in previous indoctrinations, belief systems, karma. There's just so much. It's so complicated. It's amazing that any of us really are able to thrive at all. And then compound that with trauma. That, you know, we talk a lot about trauma in the big things, you know, something, abuse or accident or something, you know, horrible happens. But I do believe that each of us, it'd be pretty hard to be an adult on this planet and not have experienced some form of trauma. Now, what we do about it, how we handle the trauma, what our resilience levels are like, how we cope with it is going to be different for each person. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because it is in that understanding that we're all so unique. I mean, just like our fingerprints are unique. We are unique in every aspect. I mean, the only thing really that we have in common is that we're the same species. But other than that, we're all unique. It's not just skin color, ethnicity, you know, groups we belong to. That stuff is all other, you know, that's the other things we choose, and other things that make us, you know, look a certain way. But within the group, you know, all Irish descendant people like me, we don't all look the same. We certainly don't all have the same point of view. We don't have the same experiences of life. And that's what makes it so, as they call it, a tapestry with beautiful threads. It makes everything so much brighter and better by having these unique qualities. And so even though we're divided in points of view, I think that there can be a point where we can have acceptance and compassion for that fact, instead of pushing people to be like us, to think like us, to do like us, to want like us. That's where I think a great deal of fear and anger and frustration comes through. It's our belief, even though we know we're all unique, but there's this belief that there's safety in numbers. And so we constantly want that safety, that it's a survival instinct, a very primitive survival instinct. But the thing is, we didn't come here to actually be part of a group. We're not robots. We came with each of us with free will. That's given to each of us. And that free will is meant to be used to express our unique divine expression in the way that only we can, which is so incredible. So this is not saying acceptance of bad behavior or inappropriate behavior or hurtful, mean, cruel things. That's not where I'm talking about acceptance. Acceptance in the sense that you disagree with me on how to live the best life, or we all love this planet and this environment, but how we're going to live on this planet in harmony, we might have a disagreement on how we're going to do that, the hows. The goal is the same, but how we're going to get there might be different. And the best way to reach a common goal is to listen to each other, because we all do have different points of view, and in listening, we might find something new that we didn't think of. Because obviously, with all of us here, we're meant to contribute, not to hold our wisdom to ourselves. I mean, that's part of the reason I share on my podcast. It's part of the reason I shared in my book, my memoir, Permission to Breathe. And I want to share with you something that was so important to me, a review I received today on the book. And I won't read you the whole thing. The whole review is on the front page of my website, cwcartandsoul.com. This was the part that confirmed that I had, in fact, reached the goal that I intended for the book. And what the writer said was, after reading her book, I feel at peace, whereas until now, I have been very hard on myself, carrying guilt and sadness for not doing enough or placing too much pressure on myself. This book has given me permission and insight to know that I did my best during the trying circumstances of my life. That is what I wanted. That was the point in sharing. My traumatic experiences those were the incidents. But what I shared in the book was more about the insights I gained from looking back on those trying times, those hurtful times, those challenging times that I faced from a very young girl and until recently. So I spent about 20 years healing and trying to make sense, as I say, of the insanity. I was trying to make sense of insanity, and it's impossible. You cannot do that. But it's important to share when you've had an experience where you've gained insight so that other people might look at things differently in their own lives. Not that they can replicate, duplicate, or imitate you or the way you did something, but so that they can gain a different point of view and consider it. So it's not about teaching from the point of view, this is how you do it. When my son was killed in a vehicle accident, I had a unique experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but other people have had experiences where their children have died, and they've had a lot of trouble going forward in their own lives after that kind of an experience. And so in sharing my story, my hope would be that another point of view might be helpful to their own healing process. They're not going to be able to do it exactly my way, but as I learn from listening and reading other people's stories, how did they interpret or deal with a situation they faced? And is that for me? So always those questions. What did they do? What did they overcome? What was the struggle? What were they thinking? How does that relate to my life? And so Permission to Breathe, a memoir, is about all of the different incidents that I guess you could say I've fortunately had many instances, many events that I could, life events that I could look at from a bigger point of view as I was going through my healing process, and in looking back, and share them with you to give you another point of view for you to consider that might give you some insight into something challenging in your own life. Or if you are trying to help someone else who's dealing with a challenge, life is challenging. It is not, there's no specific rule book of why we're here. There's no specific understanding of beyond the idea that we came here to play in this magical playground, beautiful, abundant planet, to put on the bodysuit of the human and engage with other species on the planet, challenge ourselves, climbing mountains, smelling a rain, that whole physical experience, experiencing materialism, experiencing needing a shelter, and how do we build it, and what kind are we going to build, and what can we do, that constant growth. Beyond that, why are we here if it's not simply that, to experience emotions, experience highs and lows, anger, fear, love, joy, jealousy, all of those things, and especially creativity and laughter. These are things that when we don't have a physical body, we don't have the physical sensations of those emotions. So this is really, it's a gift. Life is a gift. And one of the things I wanted to share here, in coordination with that thought of life being a gift, I had this insight the other night about how that is so. And truly the meaning of a gift is something is given, and that's it. No strings attached. If there's strings attached, it's conditional. And that's not a gift. Life is a gift given to us by the divine, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. This beautiful energy that lives and breathes through us, in us. It's a gift. So we don't owe anyone for this gift. It's a gift. It's a treasure. So what we do with that is really up to us. And so this is really important. When a child is born, very often the parents will say, we are so blessed with this gift of life, this child. But then later, we start telling that child how they owe. They might owe the parents. You owe it to the family. You owe it to the parents to get a good education, to become this career person, to do these things. And that's not true. That's not true. As a parent, we are given the gift of a child to come through us, not for us, through us. And we get the benefit of this joyful responsibility and privilege to be around this child as it grows, as it's becomes itself, as it discovers itself. And we continue to discover ourselves. But as a parent, we're entrusted with the child. So in that sense, we owe them the best we can to raise them so that they can function in the world on their own, to aspire to their own dreams, not our dreams. Our dreams, we realize our own dreams. That's what's important. Not putting our dreams on hold and expecting our children to fulfill them. You know, I really think that these are just thoughts that as we're evolving, I am so aware that 60 years ago, like when I was a kid, there were very few people who were talking astrology, or energy work was not even, it wasn't part of the common discussion. Self-healing, self-exploration, none of that was really going on except for in the few, part of the love revolution with that coming to, the consciousness was raising, but it was nothing like today. I mean, social media wasn't available. We didn't have that. But you did not hear, if you look on social media, which is meant to be like a big party, where you're engaging with other people on different topics and socializing through media. So you do it from the comfort of your home or wherever your phone is attached to you. But years ago, that wasn't the case. You had to go and meet with people, or you might talk to them on the telephone when, telephones were available, although it wasn't always common to have a private line on a telephone either. There were party lines and things like that. But I'm looking at the social media today where we're constantly telling each other, you're awesome, affirm, I am wonderful, I am great, I am healthy, telling us, how we're being abused, or that we don't need to take abuse, or, all these motivational memes. And yet, the one thing that's missing here is real human connection, which is what we need. We need that socialization that happens in person, where you can see the person's expression, is missing. Now, when I do a video podcast, like today's, I'm sorry for people watching on YouTube, this is not a video, but I will provide slides. But normally, even if I was on camera right now, you would be seeing my face, but I wouldn't be interacting with you because I'm not seeing your face, your expressions, your body language. And that's what's really a connection for humans. Even if you're walking down the street and a complete stranger is walking towards you, you smile, you have a connection. Or they don't smile, or you can read their body language. You're having an experience with other humans. And I think that is really important in our evolution. And we are at a point where things are changing so much. And I do believe the patriarchy is falling, and rightfully so. It was, it's lasted a very long time. And I'm sure it served its purpose. When I get to the other side, I'll ask about that. But for now, I look at it and I think, all right, maybe it was necessary to help humans evolve, to help us survive. But it is, people years ago, people were lucky if they lived, till they were 10 years old. There was a lot of death in childhood, a lot of disease, a lot of childbirth death of the mother, death of the child. So people just didn't live that long. And the survival was the dominant energy. Whereas now, with the improvements in health, in sanitation especially, people are living longer. Improvements in our understanding of physical health and in connection to nature and how important it is to be connected to nature. All of that is becoming we're more aware of. The medical improvements and surgeries and life-saving technologies is huge. The understandings from science and from archaeology, even looking back on our history and reconnecting to wisdom that was there and then silenced, that is helping us to evolve. So a lot of the wisdom and the gems of our past is coming back to us. And, even that, there's a little conflict on who owns that. Well, none of us own it. We don't own this planet. We don't own anything. We are here borrowing everything, and we're only here at the pleasure of divinity. It's interesting that we want to lay claim to things that are really not ours, and sometimes we have difficulty owning the things that we are actually responsible for. Our actions, how we feel about things, how we treat other people, those are things we have control over. And a lot of times we aren't able to own them. And part of that has to do with our indoctrination. We're made to feel shamed. There's so much shame on this planet for everything, especially things that are to do with our physicality. We have shame around if we want things, if we have desires, if we have bodily fluids, how we look in our bodysuits, how much weight we're carrying, how tall or short we are, all of it. Shame. We're shamed for having needs that are different than others, or wants. That person wants to live in a big mansion. Oh, that's wrong. They shouldn't do that. Someone who's living in a small, tiny house, or, whatever it might be. If it's a choice, and they can manage to do it that way, and they're enjoying it, let them be. It's not for us to say. We're so caught up with a new kind of, as we're evolving, as we're knowing more, we're also becoming as we learn more, there's a bit of an arrogance in the spiritual community, or in all, I see it all in all places, sort of a superior mentality. Well, I used to think those things, but today I think this, and so I know better than you, and I'm better than you because I have a direct connection to God, or I'm channeling, so what I say is wiser. But that's not so. Every being has a connection to spirit. So we're always channeling. That's what we call inspiration. Mostly, I would say our creativity is inspiration. Some of the greatest inventors and artists and of all time, and musicians, composers, will admit they got their greatest inspiration in meditation. So they were channeling. It's not unusual. That is our human connection to spirit. And I actually think that the only time that's not obvious is when we're out of our body, and then we're with spirit. But when we're in our body, we channel it. We channel that life force energy. We channel that divine inspiration. We all do it. And so that brings me to the other point about astrology that I mentioned before, and all the different energy works. I've noticed an interesting increase in the number of tarot readers and astrologers on YouTube. And they are all, some are better than others, some appeal to me more than others, and I've watched a few, and I do it because I'm curious about how they're picking up the information and reading for the collective, and whether or not people who are watching are believing 100% that what the person is saying is a prediction for them. Or if people have the understanding that when you're reading energy, you're picking up whatever it is you're getting. It's inspiration. That's what it is. And so if, like Nostradamus, let's say, he was giving predictions, and people talk about how accurate he was, or Edgar Cayce, or there's many others, and they were really accurate. And some of the things, they weren't accurate. And I think that's as important as the times they were, because it shows that predictions are meant as a potential. So if I'm telling you, I believe this is going to happen, it could be a warning. It could be an opportunity for you to make a different choice. So if the energy is saying, and the astrology, that planets align this way, and this is a good time to do this or that, then it's up to you, free will, using your own intuition, your own wisdom, to hear that information and listen to your own gut. That's the only purpose for all of this information. It's food for thought, something to contemplate. If someone says, well, this is the weather forecast, it might rain, you say, oh, maybe I'll take an umbrella. Or you say, I don't think it's going to rain, and you don't take an umbrella. Now, you take your chances, right? Maybe you're the kind of person who says, I'll take the umbrella just in case. Or you don't want to carry the umbrella. So you take a chance, it's going to rain, and you're going to get wet. But the information didn't make it rain. The information was simply here's a potential. This could happen. And I really just think it's fascinating that I know that when my mother was growing up, they were not thinking about any of this, what we're talking about today. They were not talking about evolution. They were not talking about self-help or, how to heal your childhood. The majority of people of my mother's generation were told, and many in my generation, just get over it. Life's going to happen. And so they, not only did they put up with abuse and unfair labor laws and unfair situations in the home and in society, they put up with it, and in many cases they contributed to it because they just didn't see another way. And maybe it just wasn't the time on the planet to be looking at those things. But now it clearly is. It clearly is. It's the earth doesn't want any more of our thoughtless creations, and it's clear that she's had enough. And whether or not, people say, well, we're not really, climate change is something that's always happened. That is true. That is true. It's the same as humans are constantly evolving. But are we evolving into the same thing we were 20 years ago? Or are we evolving into something better? And I think that's the same with Mother Earth. She is evolving. She's changing. She's adjusting. She's adapting. As are we. And if we continue to do things to certain areas of the planet and it's hurting her, she's going to make changes. And so we can continue to do what we do and just know we are going to enjoy the consequences for the good or the bad. It isn't that the planet's going to, not stop changing if we do things differently, but there are certain things that really just make sense. It doesn't make sense to be dumping garbage into the ocean. That doesn't make sense, especially when there are so many better ways to deal with the waste of human life. But we do consumption, and we're always going to be consuming things and building things and doing things, but we have to learn how to better manage the things that we are creating. And when we decide something is no longer useful, how do we dispose of it? And if we can create the things, we can create the ways to dispose of it in healthy ways. Our potential is infinite. It is really just a matter of what are we believing about this life? Why are we here? What is it that we're meant to be doing? It fascinates me that we have time to contemplate, and that we are, as much as we are constantly reminding each other, I'm enough, there is enough, we can have peace if we want peace, and so forth. We are spending more time telling ourselves this than actually practicing it. That's what I'm seeing. We are discussing it in sound bites, not as much. Even this podcast will be, if people listen to it for more than 5 minutes, I will be surprised. And which 5 minutes, I don't know. But I still do it because I feel that there is that importance of it being out there for the people that do want to find it. And I really appreciate every one of you for listening, because I do think that, if it was possible for us to be in the same room and have deep conversations like this, they would be priceless. But I want to point out one other major thing before I end this discussion, and that is, not everyone wants peace. That was a huge eye-opener for me. Not everyone wants peace. From the time I was a little girl, that's what I was striving for, peace. And in many ways, it was because I was living in a very hostile situation. So a lot of conflict, a lot of chaos, not a lot of stability. And I wanted peace. And my way of trying to find peace was very common to someone who's been through trauma. And it was to fawn, to people please, if I could please people, as many as I could, I could achieve peace. Now, I've had a couple of really important eye-openers recently, and one of them is, just because you don't create conflict doesn't mean you've got peace. And I was avoiding conflict. I was not standing up for myself because I wanted peace so much. And that creates an inner conflict because you're not being true to yourself. The first time I heard that, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I know, part of my mantra, which if you look back through the years, I've said this many times, you can't fight for peace. It doesn't make sense. But sometimes you have to stand up for peace. And sometimes that does mean having a conflict. And a small conflict by saying no to someone, which technically is a conflict. One person wants one thing and you're saying, no, I'm not going to participate. So there's a conflict. That's what it means. There's a disagreement. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. But when you say no and mean it, and don't go that way, that's it. It's easier to do that if you say it right from the beginning. But if you say, well, I don't really wanna, but then there begins this tug of war. Someone trying to convince you because you've made it sound like you could be convinced. You're not firm on that no. And being firm on your no, knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, is not creating conflict. It's actually, although there may be a conflict when you disagree, to my mind, once you've said no, you're not in conflict. You know what you stand for, even if you disagree with the other person. And there's where the peace comes. And that's where my deeper understanding of where peace starts with me. When I'm at peace with myself, when I know that my actions are in harmony with my beliefs, my true beliefs. And that's another part of it. You have to get to that point where you know what your beliefs are, what you stand for. And finally, I really want to say, how can we possibly ever say we've failed at anything when we don't really know what the game is, what the goal is? Is there a grand goal? Is there an actual win or lose? Is there really that we know, other than man-made rules? The game of life. How do you know that you failed? Do you know for sure that you were supposed to succeed in something, in whatever it was that your ego especially thought you should? Because my understanding is, if something is meant for you, you will have it. It will come to you. And sometimes what we perceive as failure is simply learning. That's all it is, exploring and learning. When you're a scientist and you do an experiment, you don't fail. The experiment is not a failure unless you absolutely already knew the outcome. So then it's not an experiment. If it's an experiment, the outcome is undetermined. So there cannot be a failure. So when I paint a painting and it doesn't turn out the way I thought it would, and by just saying that, I thought it would, that's my ego. I'm thinking that a painting, which is creation is there's no outcome. There's no predetermined outcome in creation. It's creation and it's going to be what it's going to be. So everything can be considered a success if it's part of your exploration and learning. So I really appreciate you listening today. I think we'll leave it at that. I hope I've given you some food for thought, and I'd love to hear your feedback. If you're enjoying these podcasts, if you're enjoying the information, my intention is to have some new guests to discuss some of these kinds of topics. In the fall, we'll start a new lineup of guests, and you can go to cwcartandsoul.com for podcast guests. You can listen to it there, as well as the blog, new fashions, new pieces of art. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for subscribing or following, liking, and sharing the podcast. It helps me grow this channel and hopefully reaches more people with an empowering message. It's always nice to know there is wisdom out there and you can tap into it. Visit the website for more information on how to be a guest, see the guest list and future shows and topics. And while you're there, I invite you to browse my acrylic art pieces on canvas and wood. They make an amazing home decor, high vibe art. And you'll also find the link to my storefront for luxurious women's fashions and home decor, created and designed by me with my art and manufactured in Montreal, Canada by Le Galeriste. And it is really amazing to have found them. They are environmentally conscious. They use a special dye that doesn't fade, and it's humanely manufactured. It is an awesome time to be on the planet and have these choices. So I invite you to explore and see if there is something there for you. Until next time, take care.